So incredibly delighted to have an incredible and fabulous guest. One of my dear friends and colleagues is here with us today to share his experience about healing the LGBTQ plus community. Paulo Arranaga-Grayson. I got your name right, right?
Yes.
Got it right. He is the founder and the CEO of No Matter What Recovery
Co-founder.
Los Angeles. Co-founder along with
My husband, Anthony Arranaga.
yes. And he is the COO and you're the CEO, right?
Correct. Yeah.
I have it right. Welcome to the Element Q podcast. I'm your host, TJ Woodward, and I'm thrilled to have you join us for this empowering journey. Each week, we shine a light on the authors, thought leaders, therapists, coaches, and healers of all types who are making a difference in the LGBTQ plus community. Together, we honor those who came before us, the courageous and resilient trailblazers who stood for our rights and recognition. Their strength laid the foundation we stand on today. Here, we celebrate their legacy by diving into the stories, insights, and tools that inspire gentleness, healing, and transformation. So get ready to be uplifted and empowered. This is the Element Q podcast. So welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you. I am so, when you say professional friend or colleague and friend, I mean, just watching your journey over the past 2 years that I've been in the industry and the impact that you make on the queer population is just so cool. I love it. And I love that we're aligned professionally and personally. And it's just really, it feels really good to have allies in our field that, is doing the work with the community because as you know, the LGBTQ population is a specific demographic of people that need specific services.
That's right. And I think a lot of times people get a one-day training and say that they offer LGBTQ. And I'm not trying to be shady in any way. That's what I see. And I think that's a wonderful thing on some level that people are getting trained in how to meet our community with the most compassion and understanding. But there's something really different about what we're doing, which is through our own experience. I know the word queer, the word gay, we have all these different words, but whatever word we identify with, we bring our own experience. And I think there's a different dedication to doing deeper healing with what you're creating, what I'm doing. And I'm so grateful for that. So before
touch base on that, if I may, really quick, it causes me to ask questions, right? If somebody says, oh, we offer LGBT, or we're LGBT friendly. And I'll say, what does that mean?
Yeah.
And they'll say, oh, we have a group or, and I'll say, okay, so like, what do you do with a newly diagnosed HIV person that's navigating substance abuse disorder, crystal meth addiction, and, is looking to get, regulated on his HIV meds? Or how do you navigate conversations with a non-binary patient and their family and their dead name is on their insurance policy? How do you navigate housing? How do you navigate observed UAs? Like, I think that there's more to offering LGBT affirming care or LGBT treatment than just having, a queer member of our community offering some sort of like counseling or therapy. I think it goes much deeper than that.
I agree. And I love what you're saying. There's two different pathways I want to go with that. One is like, I think there's a deeper opportunity for healing when we're dedicated to this specific population, even though with the different letters there are unique needs without a doubt. But, I've gone to many treatment programs and they're like, well, we have one gay therapist. And so we send our LGBTQ clients to this person. And I think that is a wonderful thing. But we're talking about something, it's the difference. It reminds me of the difference between trauma informed or trauma focused, right?
Sure.
LGBT informed or LGBTQ informed is really different than that being the primary focus. So
here's a great example. When you have a trans person that's going into sober living, right? And they identify as a trans female, or they're going to detox or residential, and they'll say, oh, we're putting them in their own room. The intention there is to protect the client, right? And to make sure that they're safe. But the bigger picture is like, is that promoting having the person feel othered or having them feel part of? There's a bigger picture kind of concept there. So I understand why programs do say, oh, we'll give a trans person their own room. But what are the implications therapeutically to help move the process along for them? And are we setting them up for success?
Yeah, and that ties into the topic that we're going to start with, because before the camera,
we could go on forever about all this.
Fancy green room. We were talking about internalized homophobia and shame, a couple of light topics, but I mean, in the conscious recovery method, I identify shame as one of the three root causes of addictive behavior. And within our community, there is so much internalized homophobia. And I see it running rampant, not just in our clients, but also in the people working in the field. So there's a couple of places we could leap from. I'm curious what your thoughts are about those two and yet interlinked topics.
I take my cue from Mel McCracken, our executive director at No Matter What Recovery. When they talk about internalized homophobia, they actually refer to it as internalized homo-negativity, where I find that so smart because phobia has a negative connotation to it, and homo-negativity is a narrative that we're telling ourselves, right? I need to lower my voice. I need to be able to walk in this room, and I can't hold my wrist a certain way, or I think, and for me, internalized homophobia contributed to my substance use disorder for years because I never felt part of, right? I never felt like I was good enough to be in certain places. And it was this narrative that I was telling myself, oh, I'm too feminine to be able to play dodgeball, or whatever kind of narrative I would tell myself. And so I do think that it contributes a lot to substance use disorder. And it really is a condition that affects people for long-term use. And so, when looking at treating LGBTQ folks, internalized transphobia, internalized homophobia, all of those internal messages that we're telling ourselves, we get to uncover, discover, and discard a new narrative and look at, how to apply some rethinking to that when we're getting sober.
When you were saying that, it reminded me of a story out of my own journey. And that is when I was 20 years sober, 40 years old, I went back to school. And I went back to school to a program that was really inviting me to take a really deep look. And I would have told you at that time, I've healed my shame. I've healed my internalized homophobia. And through this 5-year program, by the end of it, this professor who is a friend of mine, and he's just really intuitive and amazing, asked on the last week of classes, is there anyone willing to use an example from their life as an opportunity to look at this framework we're exploring? And I'm like, yes, they're not paying me what I'm worth. And so he wrote that on the board. And somehow, by the end of that week, by Friday afternoon, he just looked at me and said, what was it like for you being attracted to the same boys in high school that were calling you the F word every day? And I just broke down sobbing and ended up in the fetal position. And I felt it was very transformational. But the reason I'm sharing that story is even I thought I had done so much work, which I had, but there was another layer. There was something deeper.
It's funny because I struggle with imposter syndrome in our field.
Mm.
I am a newer CEO. I, finally just got a degree. I graduated a few weeks ago. But when I entered in this field, I had a ninth grade education and my street knowledge of selling drugs and being caught up in that world. I had in my professional journey had done career development, people development, business development, like all of those kind of roles. So I was able to apply that skill set to this field. But in addition to like walking into our events that we have, for work or conventions or whatever that looks like, I definitely struggle with imposter syndrome and being around, a lot of individuals, because I live in a very gay bubble. Like my treatment center is queer, my meetings are queer, I have queer friends. And so when I walk into this field of people that work in our industry, sometimes not only do I struggle with imposter syndrome, but there's also this internalized homophobia that I like internally feel where I'm like, oh my gosh, when I introduce myself to someone, I have to lower my voice or I have to, it's just the instinct, right? It's like, hi, I'm Paulo. It turns into this like whole other thing. And like when I walk away, I'm like, why do I do that to myself? Like I have nothing to be ashamed of. I have a big, beautiful life that I've built for myself in sobriety. And I'm representing a beautiful company with a great message. Like, why do I feel this way? And it's just this internal narrative sometimes, right? It goes back to that, I'm not good enough. I'm a piece of shit. Kind of narrative where I tell myself from my disease almost 10 years ago.
Well, and what's interesting is you said something that I think is so powerful, and that it's like an automatic response, right? And in my work, I really invite people to look at what's happening in the unconscious and subconscious, not just in the behavior, but not only what are those narratives, but what's the energy or the frequency attached to those narratives, right? And so for most of us, and I know times are changing, but most of us who are in the queer community received such sometimes overt, sometimes covert messages that it's not okay to be us. Some of us even had religion added to that. God doesn't love you because of who you are. And so we bury all of this so deeply, and that becomes like these core false beliefs. And then, of course, we have strategies to manage it. And sometimes those strategies are effective for years. And then at some point, as you said earlier, it's about dismantling. It's like uncovering that, discovering it, and ultimately discarding that.
And it's a journey and it's a process, I mean, and, I love when you always talk about heal the healers, right? I think that concept for me is the first time that I heard it, it was so powerful because working in this field and seeing a disenfranchised community every day and working with the population, I understand that I have some privilege, right? I'm a white, cis, gay male, right? I have privilege. Working with trans women of color, the trans population of trans men, Asian trans men, working with disenfranchised communities and seeing the burden that they carry, right? I know how hard my life has been, right? I had every card stacked against me that could be stacked against me, and nothing I went through compared to some of the people that walk through our doors and the privilege that me and my team get and our team get to like be able to work with these individuals is so powerful. And I say this all the time. I feel like I struck gold, right? I was like 5.5 years sober, and I was like, what am I meant to do with my life? Is it selling lipstick? Like, am I supposed to be selling lipstick for the rest of my life and luxury cosmetics? And I feel like I struck gold with my career, like working with being in the trenches with our community, making an impact, um, you know, eh, eh, helping people change their lives and be able to walk into some self-love and some self-acceptance. But when you say that heal the healers thing, right? Sometimes I leave work and I just cry because I feel like I feel the devastation that our community feels, and we try to stay as positive and affirming as we can, but as someone that works in this field and working with a community that is so um, stigmatized, it does take its toll.
Well, and you're saying a couple of things that I think are really important, and I'd love to take a little bit deeper dive into.
Yeah.
You are correct that I've discovered, at least for now, my passion and my purpose in this field is helping healers heal. And I want to go a little bit deeper looking at our specific community within the healing community, right? So I see a lot. It seems like there's more even infighting within the LGBTQ community sometimes than coming from outside of the community. Divisiveness, using and theming, and like you're not doing it right. And there's, I think a lot of that comes from our own woundology. And that phrase, I always give my friend Temple Hayes credit. She said that, and I just love it, to be coming from my woundology and being. When we come into this field, I came into this field in part because of my own trauma, in part because of my own addiction and recovery. And there have been times in this field that I've wanted to wear the hero cape. And the hero cape is like, here's all these broken people and I'm here to fix them. And I see that running rampant in our society within the treatment industry, but maybe even more so in LGBTQ. So I'm inviting people to do their own healing so that we're not the hero, but our clients are the hero. And that shift is so subtle but dramatic in the way we are more effective that way, but also in our own sense of burnout. And I love that you said you cry at the end of the day. When I worked full time in treatment, I worked in Sausalito and I would take the ferry home to San Francisco. And I found this little corner where the water was splashing in my face, and I would just let myself cry almost every afternoon because I realized that I had absorbed so much, but that wasn't a negative thing. That was me doing my job, but I wanted to release it so that I could really allow that person to do their healing instead of thinking it's my job.
I think what you were talking about in the community, Mel refers to it as lateral violence. And it's, for me, when I hear the word violence, it's a very abrasive word, right? But there is this lateral violence within the community. And we see it a lot with the trans population, right? Am I passing or am I not, right? So people come through our doors, and some may be further along in their transition than others. And there is this like, kind of otherness that instinctively, naturally happens. And we really try to destigmatize and get rid of shame and get rid of this othering process and having this level playing field because it's so important for the healing process, right? And as addicts and alcoholics, we have huge egos and low self-esteem. A lot of us, I'm one of them. And I feel like through my own healing journey, I've been able to, and sometimes it takes people that I trust to say, girl, you're an ego right now. Like, you need to take a deep breath and chill out, you know? But like, I'm also self-aware now to the point today where I can say, hey, like, am I coming from a place of love? Am I coming from a place of compassion? Am I coming from a place of empathy? Because I got sober in the world of sit down, shut up, and do the work. And that's what worked for me, right? Like I needed somebody to like, be like, this is what you need to do. And that heavy 12-step approach doesn't work with everybody. But that's what worked for me. And so, but even working in this field, I've had to change my approach with clients and style flex and realize like, is someone needing this, this loving, compassionate approach, or do they need me to be really honest and transparent and say like, what you're doing isn't working?
It's interesting, Paulo, because I love that we can talk about this because that sit down and shut up thing saved my life, but it also almost killed me.
Yeah.
And it's very, very interesting in my own journey because it was initially what I at least perceived that I needed because I got sober around that. I got sober in 1986 and it was old school back then. It was like, you don't say anything. I remember this
I
one.
spilled more than you drank,
Right. Well, and we used to smoke too. And there was this woman, I cannot remember her name, but she had her own chair that she brought from home, this big like velvet chair. And she had a long black cigarette holder. And she would say, darling, I don't want to hear from you for the first 6 months. Shut up. Right. Yeah. So like in some ways that saved me, but that energy also almost killed me at 18 months sober when I was suicidal and I didn't have a place to go. And I met a woman who was this loving energy and this took me on this journey of rediscovering my true nature. So I can actually see from my own experience the brilliance of both of those. And I started watching people get sober and gravitating towards certain people. So I think consciousness is interesting in that way. In some ways, we find what we need. I always want to push back a little bit on that method because I think it's very behavioral based and it doesn't actually get to the root of anything. I'm not saying it's not useful for some people.
I've also found asking questions in the beginning of like, how do you respond to feedback? How would you like this conversation to go? Because I do need to be really honest with you, and it may not sound great coming out, but like, how do you receive truth? How do you receive that and have the person that you're having the conversation with kind of navigate the conversation in a way where you can then feel comfortable to say what you need to say, and I can like auto tune it to where they're going to hear it. Because if somebody's not going to hear the message because they don't respond well to that kind of feedback or conversation, then you want to be able to have them hear the message, right? And I know that sometimes they need to hear it from a softer person. Sometimes I know I'm not for everybody, but at the end of the day, there are people that respond well to it. And I've learned it all through sponsorship, to be honest. A lot of the things that I do throughout my daily professional life, it's through my work in a 12-step program in recovery that's taught me a lot of the lessons. And I also learn from our clients. I feel like I learn every day. And that in remaining teachable, I think for me has been really important in my professional journey as well as my personal journey.
And, the cliche, but it's so true, is what kept me sober today might not next week, that kind of idea, right? And even within my 12-step experience, for example, like my relationship with 12-step has changed so much over years, or even what I consider to be the 12-step approach. Like, oh, I grew and expanded and now I see some things differently. And that's just the beauty of life, right? The more I expand, the more curious I am. And you talked about curiosity. One of the things that I offer people with conscious recovery is when you're looking at the behavior, to look at the behavior as a brilliant strategy that's managing a core false belief. And the part that I'm leaning into here is I often, not always, but often wonder, well, I always wonder, but it is often that the behavior is the opposite of the core false belief. So here's my example. You talked about being someone who comes from ego, right? I know this is shocking, Paulo, but people have called me entitled in my life. I don't know how they've ever done that. But I know what the root of that entitlement was and is. It's a sense of not being worthy. So I'm overcompensating. And if we're only working with the quote unquote entitled or the ego or the arrogant person, and we're trying to, some models are like, let's break that down. But I want to get down to like, what's that managing? And if we can start to heal that other behavior, like, all the shopping and the lookism and the like pretending to be from a different class than I am, and all the things that I did mostly in my 20s, but certainly in my drinking and using, and getting down and healing some of that, it's like, oh, there's something much deeper going on than just the behavior.
Can I ask a question? Would you consider internalized homophobia a false core belief?
Well, I mean, it's shame, right? And it comes in different forms. So the internalized homophobia, I think, can become a shame-based reality. And, core false beliefs usually start with I am or I am not. So I am not worthy, I'm not good enough, or I am broken absolutely can come from the messages we received early in life. And of course, it's easy, and this, maybe it's controversial in these days to say, it's easy to externalize that and say, well, if this person just wasn't in office, then I'd be free. But we know that does help something, but it doesn't help the internal process because we concretize that so deeply in our unconscious at such an early age. I mean, I'm not going to go back and blame my homophobic uncles and aunts and friends and family. And I actually had a really good experience in my home, and strangely enough, a very good experience in my church. But at school in Indiana in the early 1970s, it was not pleasant being a little gay, I can tell you.
Yeah, and that's why I think, to talk a little bit about no matter what in our specialties, we specialize in Chem-Sex, and we have what I would consider the best Chem-Sex program in the country. Crystal meth is a shame killer, and it eradicates shame. The minute that someone gets high on crystal meth, shame is gone. Mm. And that is why it is so, I don't want to use the word popular. It's used so heavily within the LGBTQ plus community, is because our community historically is just full of shame. We're told from a very young age, you don't walk like that, don't talk like that, you can't play with that toy, you can't, you have to walk in a certain way. Like all of that internalized messaging that we're told as children, or that messaging we internalize. And then when we become young adults, of course, we're just full of shame, right? And so the minute crystal meth enters the system, and sex is tied to this as well, right? Especially with religion. I grew up dramatically Catholic. And so I thought the minute that I had sex with a man, I was going to hell, right? And so the minute crystal meth enters the picture, that thought is gone. I can have the kind of sex that I want to have. And so then the fusion of crystal meth and sex become together. Mel always says, if it fires together, it wires together. It's that, and when we look at Chem-Sex and treating Chem-Sex, especially with no matter what recovery, it is this arc of things that we do to help navigate, looking at our core sex beliefs, moral injury, internalized homophobia, shame, internalized shame, and hatred towards oneself, how we navigate sex, how we navigate religious trauma, and all of these things concurrently, where we're treating co-occurring anxiety, depression, PTSD, trauma. There's this whole kind of finesse and process that happens with treating Chem-Sex, but especially within the gay community or sexualized drug use, as when it comes to the gay community or when you're using sex and substances, we treat it as one addiction, not two different addictions. And that is what sets us apart at No Matter What Recovery. And the reason that we started offering this Chem-Sex treatment is because when I got sober in this bro-y program with people. I was sitting in groups with people that looked like the ones that used to bully me as a child. So I wasn't comfortable opening up and discussing about my drug addiction or my trauma or anything like that. And so wanting to create this beautiful community and space where people can talk about really heavy things in a therapeutically sound way has been what's been, so successful over it No Matter What. And I community for me is the opposite of addiction. It's the opposite of shame. It's the opposite of all of these negative things. And when I was using and getting high, I just wanted to be loved.
That's right.
Like I just wanted a community. I wanted to be accepted. I wanted to be able to walk down the street and hold my husband's hand and not be scared. And that's where my addiction for me was rooted. And so, we marry the therapeutic processes that specialize in treating all of those things, but also with the community piece, which I think is really important. Because getting sober with a community of people that see you and understand you, and that have been in your shoes, I think is really important.
Yeah, and I mean, it's literally the way we heal shame is to create a safe enough space to bring what's in the shadow or the unconscious or the subconscious, whether it's shame, unresolved trauma, disconnection from true self,
Freedom loss.
secrecy, right? The secrecy that we have, and some of us carry so much shame around. I mean, I remember just based on my dad and my uncles and their relationship with sex that I was terrified to become a sexual being. Then realizing on top of that, I'm a little gay boy. It's like, oh my gosh. And then in a culture that didn't really allow it. I mean, my boyfriend in high school, we didn't even call each other boyfriends. We didn't even acknowledge it to each other. How are you in
Roommates.
a relationship where you're not even calling what it is?
Yeah.
It was a non-sexual relationship because I was absolutely terrified to become a sexual being. So I know we could talk for hours, but we're coming toward the end of our time. We like to
Has
keep
it been that already?
it has been 30
Oh my
minutes. Can you
gosh.
believe it? So
Oh.
I want to ask you if there's anything in closing that you want to offer, that you want to say. Is there a topic that we didn't cover that's in your heart right now or on your mind?
I think for me, whenever I do anything publicly that has a reach, I always want to speak to uh, our community that is in places that don't have the resources that we have in Los Angeles and San Diego. I grew up in Slidell, Louisiana, between Biloxi and New Orleans. You grew up in Indiana, to the people that are in Texas, Florida, Tennessee, North Carolina, where they don't feel like they have the community piece that we talked about or the LGBTQ resources that we have in Southern California, there is a solution. And you can get sober, you can find a community, you can be queer. We're the messaging in the media right now and politically is so anti everything that you and I stand for. And so I just want to say, just for having the little platform that I have, is saying that like we see you and we hear you and like we are here for you. You find your tribe and find your people. And if you can't, please follow No Matter What Recovery LA on Instagram. Check out no matter what recovery.com. We have the No Matter What Club podcast. TJ is coming up on our next season for our Pride series that's coming out. So there are resources and you feel free to email podcast at no matter what recovery.com if you have any questions about resources. I'm pretty informed with throughout the country of LGBT centers and suicide hotlines and everything. And so my message is to the listener of the podcast that may feel like they don't have a solution. And I promise you that there is a solution. Because again, I come from having every card stacked against me to having a big, beautiful life and long-term sobriety, TJ as well. And so that's my message. And I don't know why I felt that I needed to say that
Well,
here,
I
but
love it. And I'll just piggyback on that and say if anyone who's watching right now or listening right now who does feel isolated and feel like you don't have community, I want to also remind you, not only is there community available to you, but you came into the world as a whole and perfect being, and that's still who and what you are. So no matter what the world has told you, no matter what messages you've internalized or absorbed, the truth is much greater than what your mind might be telling you. And so it is worth it to do this work. Sometimes people say, well, isn't it hard work to heal this? And I will say, yes, but it's even harder to not heal it. And I only know that because I lived it, and it was way too painful to live that way. So there is a solution, and that solution is internal, and it's also in community. So Paulo, thank you so much for being with us. And for everyone who's watching or listening, if you enjoyed this episode, or even if you didn't, that's okay. Someone who you think might enjoy it, share it with them. Or please like and subscribe. And thank you, everyone, once again, for an incredible conversation. Thank you, Paulo, for another conversation on the No Matter What. I was going to
coming out in a few weeks.
I was calling it the No Matter What podcast. I love it.
No Matter What Club. Yeah.
There's synchronicity there. The No Matter What podcast and the Element Q podcast. Synchronicity, everyone. Peace and blessings, everyone. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Element Q podcast. It's an honor to walk this path of healing and transformation with you. Remember, the courage and resilience of those who came before us live on in each of us. Let's continue to carry their legacy forward as we support one another in creating a world filled with love, gentleness, and empowerment. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please subscribe, leave a review, and share this podcast with someone who needs to hear it. Together, we're building a brighter future, one story at a time. Until next time, I'm TJ Woodward, and this has been the Element Q podcast.